Okay, so getting started. Thank you for all being here today. My name is Dr. Keith McCall. I am the Assistant Director of the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards. We are part of the graduate school at Florida State University. Our job is to help graduate students find and then apply for external funding, so fellowships, grants, scholarships, and awards. Today we have three graduate students at FSU and a former graduate student who is now a postdoctoral scholar here at FSU, who all have had the experience of both applying for things that they didn't win and applying for things that they did win. And so this is a chance for them to be a resource for you all to ask questions about what it's like to apply for funding, the challenges incurred along the way, how funding might have changed the course of their graduate career in various ways. So with that, I would like to ask our four panelists to introduce themselves. We can go alphabetically. So Alabo, we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Alaba. I'm a doctoral candidate in the musicology program. I'm currently on the ACLS Mellon Dissertation Innovation Fellowship. What else are we supposed to say? That's it, right?
Sorry, that's enough. I mean, if you want to say a little bit about the research you do, that's also fine. Each of you, if you want to say something about your research area or your area of practice, feel free. Yeah.
Generally, I'm interested in music and politics, and I am writing a dissertation on the Nigerian musician named Fela Kuti. That is spelled Felakuti. Yeah, that's about it for me. Thanks.
Yeah. Continuing alphabetically, Emily.
Oh, yes. Okay, hello, everybody. My name is Emily Liu. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in the Department of History, and I am on a Fulbright-Hays Doctoral Dissertation Research Abroad Fellowship to Japan. But I'm currently still in Florida. I'm leaving next month. My research area is very similar to Alaba's. I research the intersection between music and politics in World War II Japan. I study mainly Japanese military music as a form of soft propaganda. Yeah, nice to meet you.
I comes before R, so Micon.
Hi guys, my name is Micon. I'm a former graduate student. I got my PhD at the College of Medicine, and now I'm a postdoc here at the College of Medicine. And I study heart diseases, and I applied for the American Heart Association Predoctoral Fellowship a couple years ago when I was a predoc, and I got it. And now as a postdoc, I still apply for grants in the AAJ funding and also the Heart Rhythm Society. Yeah, and I'm an international student, so I can also speak for international students who want to apply for, grants and they don't know which ones you are eligible. So I can help with that as well.
Hi, I'm Margot. I'm a Master of Social Work student. I'm sorry about the background noise. My partner does not know how to modulate his voice on a call. So unlike a lot of folks here, I didn't have one big one. I've gotten a ton of little ones. So I tallied this up before. I think I got 16 over the course of 3 years. But my bigger ones, or my more recognizable ones, were PEO, continuing career development grant, and then Point BIPOC scholarship, and then a couple social work specific ones that were pretty big deals.
Thank you all. So for those of you who are here to attend today, please feel free to ask questions. I think this would go best if this is a sort of conversation-driven discussion panel where those of you in attendance are setting the agenda of the questions being asked. I do have questions that I will ask, but at any point that anybody would like to ask a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat, to raise a hand, simply take yourself off of mute. But I'll start with a question that I think probably a lot of people wonder about, which is, how did you all find the things that you applied for? How did you know that that was something that you could apply for, that maybe was a good fit, was worth your time to apply for?
I'll start. So I could not afford grad school without money. And because it's a master's program, they don't give you anything. So I decided when I was applying that I was just gonna hit the ground running and start applying for stuff. So I have a really I don't have to do it anymore, had a really intense system where I was just combing a ton of scholarship websites, like Unigo and all of those, like if you Google scholarships. And I was looking under every category that I could possibly fit in. So like LGBTQ stuff, Hispanic stuff, social work stuff, psychology stuff, because it's adjacent and sometimes I qualify for those. And that's how I found almost everything with the exception of one or two that I ended up getting.
For me, I always knew that I wanted to apply to the Fulbright because I do history and I do, history. I focus on history outside of the US, and the Fulbright's mission is basically to send US citizens abroad to do research or to teach English. And I also had, coming from my master's institution, I also knew that a lot of the faculty members in the history department had gotten the Fulbright. So like for me, I've always seen it as sort of like a competitive thing to have on your CV. And so there's also that aspect to it. And I think for the other scholarships that I tried to apply for, there were just different opportunities that, my advisors or other faculty members that sort of helped to connect me to. And there's also the Pivot portal that, all FSU students should have access to. You can use that to help you kind of identify what scholarships or fellowship opportunities are applicable to you. So I also did use that system.
Well, for me, I can say it both came up through serendipity, chance, and just my quest to always find funding. And I said chance in a lot of ways. I'm in a department where most of my professors hold some sort of, big grant or fellowship. My major professor held the distinguished Fulbright in Tanzania. So I was surrounded, well, still surrounded by a lot of people who are great scholars, who are great grant writers, and all that. Um, so that's part of it. Another part of it is Dr. Stevenson was actually invited to my department to come give a talk on funding, and she shared the funding databases that you can find on OGFA website. And I spent hours. I promise you, I spent days even on these databases just figuring out, because she basically just explained that there are different fundings for you at different points. As a pre-doctoral student, there are fundings that are available. As a doctoral student, there are fundings that you qualified for. And as a dissertation, a PhD candidate, there's another, that's another point in your career where you qualify for certain fellowships. So what I did was basically outlined different fellowships that I qualify for different levels, right? Um, and I've been quite fortunate with a lot of fellowships. And the truth is, and one of my professors told me this, that fellowship begat fellowships. So if you get one, there's a very high chance you'll get more. Um, so what really opened the door for me was the McKnight Doctoral Fellowship. And after that, a lot of fellowships just kept coming in. So yeah, mine is both chance and just quest to find funding. If I qualify for it, why not apply for it, right? So yeah.
So for my case, it was a little more specific because since I study heart diseases, fortunately, there is an institution called American Heart Association that funds research related to heart diseases and vasculature diseases. So my mentor was the one who told me about it. I even asked about NIH grants, but because I was an international student, I didn't have a green card or anything, so I was not eligible for NIH grants. So American Heart Association was the one I could apply at the time, especially because it's within the scope of my research. So that's how I ended up knowing about mine pretty much through my mentors.
Those of you following along, I did put into the chat. We've done a workshop on Pivot. Pivot is a really powerful resource for finding funding, but it also can be a little complicated to figure out how to set up searches in it. And because you do sign in through your FSU email account, when you sign into Pivot, you go to your own actual Pivot profile, which allows you to do things like save searches, track specific opportunities. We've done a workshop that you can access on YouTube. It's about a 30-minute tutorial on how to make the most out of Pivot. So I encourage you all to go and watch that. Also, Alba mentioned our funding databases, so I dropped that link in as well. And as Alba suggested, searching for funding is tedious and takes time, and that is the one thing my office will not do for you, is actually tailor a funding search for you and tell you what to apply for. We'll connect you with the resources. We'll try to give you the knowledge and the skills you need to conduct a funding search. But because it can take a few hours per student, we just don't have the capacity to do that. But we try to empower you to be able to do it for yourself. So I'll go on with one of my questions, unless anybody would like to raise a specific question for our panelists or for any one specific panelist. Okay, then moving along. So you've all applied for multiple things at this point. Let's talk for a moment about the things that you applied for and you didn't get, and why you continued to apply and what you think you got out of the process of going, rather than just seeing it as a failure. Hopefully you got something out of the process of having applied for some things. So can you all talk a little bit about maybe what that process gave you, how that might have led to you eventually securing the things you have now, sort of what you learned along the way of, or basically what you learned from rejection?
I'll start. This is something I really love talking about. I think I have been rejected more times than I have actually, gotten acceptance. I think I started applying right off when I got into graduate school, and I applied to the PD Soros Fellowship for New Americans. At the time, I was a green card holder, so I qualified. I basically fit into what they were looking for, but I applied 3 years straight until I didn't qualify anymore, and I never got it. And what's interesting is, although that fellowship looks like it's really for Ivy League schools, to be honest, because there are not so many people who are not from Ivy League who get it anyways. So that's one major fellowship I applied to that I never got. I applied to Ford Foundation twice. The first time I was rejected. The second time I got honorable mention. I applied for this West African Research Association Fellowship. The first time I was rejected. The second time I got it. And I can go on and on. But what's very interesting in this process is, and it's probably one of the most challenging tasks to complete when applying for a fellowship, is to be able to tailor your application to a non-specialist audience. And what I mean by that is, I'm a musicologist, and most times the people who are reviewing these applications are not musicologists. So how do I explain and make sure the person reviewing my application understands what I'm writing, without using, jargons and discipline specific language? So for me, that, it's the most challenging thing, and it's also been the most blessing for me, just, applying to different fellowships, because I think I'm at the point now where I'm able to present my musicological work to engineers, to doctors. Just like 3-4 weeks ago, I was at the McKnight Fellowship, what do we call it, summit or something like that, and I had to present my work to a group of STEM guys, engineers, and people who pretty much stay in the lab, and that's like the most difficult audience to present something in the humanities to, but they understood what I was doing, and I think for me, just going through that process of applying to various fellowships, I've been able to develop the skill to really explain what I'm doing, the significance of what I'm doing, and why it's important. And I think for every scholar, um I think we all need to be able to develop that skills anyways, and one way that you learn to do it is by applying to fellowships. And I'll add this just before I drop. um Grant writing is a different genre of writing. Um, and when I started applying, I mean, I look back now at some of the applications and I'm like, wow, did I really write this? Like this, no one should even look at this, right? Um, it's not like it's bad, but it's just not the way you write grant applications. And sometimes, there are no classes offered in our department on how to write grant or how to apply for grants. And so the only way to really learn is by trying and by using the resource around you. And OGFA, Dr. McCall has been very helpful. Like my ACLS grant that I am on currently, we worked on it like several months. So use the resources around you, and you probably won't get the help you need from your department. You might not, but I think at the end of the day, whether you get the fellowship or you don't get it, there's so much skills that you learn through that process of applying. Yeah.
Yeah, Marco, do you want to go? Yeah, so this is also something that I like to talk about, like the grants that I applied for but did not get, because I also applied to numerous. I think actually maybe there were only 4 that I applied to, but the Fulbright-Hays was the only one that I received. I applied to the US Fulbright US Student Award, also a research award to Japan. That I made a semifinalist, but I did not make the finalist cut. And there was another one that was like a local Japanese college grant to fund foreign researchers to study things in Japan. I think I was like the alternate for that one, but I wasn't ultimately promoted. And there was also a grant from the Japan Foundation that I applied for. That was just a hard no. But even for the Fulbright-Hays, I was initially made an alternate for this award. But I think during that time, the Department of Education, which funds the grant, was still waiting for more, I think, federal money to come in. And also if somebody happens to give up their spot as a fellow, or what do you call it, like awardee, then of course you get promoted. So I was lucky enough to have been promoted. That's how I received the Fulbright-Hays. But I mean, that was not the whole quest to like fellowship is definitely not for the faint-hearted. The first time I was rejected by the US student program from the Fulbright, that was pretty devastating time for me, because I had put so much effort into my grant, into the application, and I had high hopes. But I think if I have to, identify one thing that I learned from all these rejections is acknowledge and accept the fact that this is all a crapshoot. You can be just as qualified as somebody who ends up getting the grant. But for some reason, maybe it's the people on the selection committee in this round, or it's some other factors, you didn't happen to make the cut. But it's not like it doesn't really I guess, refute the fact that you're still capable and you can still be qualified for a different grant, or maybe the same grant, but a different round. So I think just kind of coming to terms and acknowledging that if I had known this early on, I don't think that I would have felt as much stress and pressure and just negativity overall by rejections. Yeah, so I think it's important to really like normalize rejections and be okay with it, and use that as a motivation and to hone in your grant writing skill, and also to refine your own research. Yeah.
So I agree with everything both of you said in terms of what like difficulty in dealing with rejection, but I tallied this up before last night, and I think I applied to between 60 and 75 scholarships over the last 3 years, and I got 16 of those. So I had a lot of rejections, and a lot of the rejections are just silence, right? Like I think the bigger fellowships will actually send you a rejection email. I had applied for probably 20 before school started, maybe more. And I took a gamble and started summer semester with maybe $500, if even that, of award money, hoping some of it would come through. And I ended up getting maybe 2 more that came through that summer and didn't hear from any of the others. So a lot of it was, and I sort of expected this going in, because that's like applying for jobs is a similar situation where you just radio silence. But I think so much of what was tough for me, in terms of the longevity, because I was really getting these like $500, $1,500 scholarships that had to add up, knowing how many applications I had to do and how many godforsaken essays I had to write, only to find out 6 months later if I was going to get $1,000 out of the whole lot that I had just done. So that sort of like pacing myself and building that stamina, to expect it to be a slow process and hope and pray was both the toughest part, and I think the part I became the most is used to the right word, like that didn't stress me so much by the end.
I definitely agree with everything that everyone else has said. And I think what I can add here, it's about managing your frustration after you hear back from reviewers. Because most of the time, you're gonna feel sad for not getting it. But sometimes you feel like it was not fair. And I have cases where I got a reviewer saying that I don't have controls or statistical analysis in my project. And I was like, how? I only have 2 groups, a control and a mutant that I'm studying. So I definitely have a control, but for some reason the reviewer didn't see. So I wanted to email, the American Heart Association and be like, this is really unfair. It's not that I didn't accept, the rejection. Is more about like, it was really unfair. So most of the time you're gonna face situations where for you think the information is explicit right there. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. You just think it is crystal clear. But for other people who are reviewing, they are tired, they have many others to review. So be prepared to receive unfair judgment of your work. And unfortunately, you have to wait for another cycle to submit a rebuttal if the fellowship allows. And then you can um, talk about the weaknesses of your work and how you improved over the year and submit a rebuttal. That's what I did. I ended up getting after submitting a rebuttal. So just because you receive a rejection, it's not the end of the world. You have a chance to improve your work based on the criticism, even though you think they're stupid and unfair, but you have the chance of improving your work and applying again.
Yeah, I would like to add one thing quickly, Dr. McCall. Well, my own strategy for handling rejection is, in the moment, it's almost impossible uh, to see any reason why anyone, or to probably even understand why anyone would reject your work, because you put so much time into it. There's so much emotional ties with your project. So what I do personally to not feel too bad is if I get a rejection, I read it and then I close my laptop for the day and just not think about, you know, anything school related or anything related to that grant or whatever. Just do something else. And then maybe the next day after 24, 48 hours, when I feel like, okay, now I'm ready, I might go back and look at that rejection letter. And usually some of them will send you comments on what could be better. But if you read those comments when you just receive the rejection letters, there's no way you will be fair with your assessment. So I usually just let go for a couple hours or days and then come back and look at those comments. And some of those comments have transformed the way that I was initially thinking about some of the projects that I'm working on now. To a point where you know um it's almost impossible for me to sell you what I'm doing now and you not fall in love with it. But it all stemmed from all of this comment from and an example of that is the Fulbright process at FSU. The three professors who interviewed me gave me so many comments that I never actually got the Fulbright. I was a finalist but never got it. But it was the comment from that Fulbright application that actually transformed my application for the ACLS. Because some of the ideas they gave me, I wasn't even thinking of it. And partly I'm also going to try and say something about Audrey's question. Um, Sometimes we're so confined to our own discipline that we don't see the um, interdisciplinary um, um, diversions that come into our project. And sometimes it's not until you share it with other folks that they are able to tell you, oh, you can think about it this way. Say for example, I share my work with someone who is in religious studies, and then they find a connection with it. But I wasn't thinking about religious studies when I started working on it. But by just sharing my work with someone in religious studies, they found connections and they're telling me about those connections. And now I'm looking into those connections and I'm like, this is very interesting, right? So the projects that really sell, and now I'm digressing, the projects that really sell are projects that are interdisciplinary in nature, to be honest. And every work really can be very interdisciplinary. If you just, read outside of your discipline, share your work with people outside of your discipline. If you're applying to grant, share with people outside of your discipline. You'll be surprised what connections you will find in other places. But with rejection, to be honest, just leave it for a couple days and then come back to it. You'll be fine afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you all shared crucial things there. I mean, the truth of the world of funding really is just that, you will get rejected from most of the things that you apply for. And a rejection of your application is not at all a rejection of the worth of you as an applicant or the work that you do or the promise of the work that you do. It just sometimes one application was slightly better than yours, or, these are just being read by people. And as Micon said, sometimes, the reviewer's just kind of tired and they're in a bad mood when they read yours. And it's just luck of the draw that yours was the one that was the last one they were trying to get through in a day, and they just didn't give it the time that maybe it needed to have a really careful reading and for them to really see the worth of the work. But that also helps that maybe next year you can find even more clear ways to spoon feed the reviewers what they're looking for so that they have no excuse to be annoyed at your application. There's I can never remember specifically who it is, but there is an example that people like to throw out when they're talking about rejection, which is that there's somebody who, on the same day that they learned that they won the Nobel Prize, they also got rejected for a major grant they had applied for. So it can happen to anyone. And that is just a part of how it goes. And there's a quote by a singer-songwriter from Florida that I really like. He says, "The experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted." So every time you apply for something, you're learning how to clarify your thoughts. And through that process of learning how to better explain what it is you do, you're also better understanding what it is you do. I mean, Alba, I think that's exactly the experience you're talking to, is that not only did you become better at telling people what your work does, you got a better understanding of what your work is all about through this process of refining how you explain it. So thank you all for sharing that. I think, again, as was brought up during these comments, normalizing failure is an important thing, and being upfront about both that, yeah, it stings, but also that, you know, you can come back to it with some clarity and maybe take something worthwhile out of it. And also sometimes at the end of the day, that rejection doesn't really mean anything. It's not at all a judgment on you or your work. It's just a failure in that one specific instance. Do we have any audience questions at this point? Emma, I see you have a question in the chat about you're new in a new lab and don't have any senior grad students above me, and you're looking for reliable spaces to see application examples. So the four of you, did you come across, either did you have colleagues in your departments or other students who maybe were willing to share their application materials with you, or did you all find any resources to see examples that were helpful along the way?
In my department, most people ahead of me were not applying to fellowships. But what I did, usually I will go on the website and find past recipients and just email 5 to 7 of them that are close enough to my discipline and ask if they're willing to either meet with me or share a sample of their work. And maybe 1 out of 7 would respond and will be willing to share with you. You know, maybe 0, but at least I usually just try and reach out to someone and see if they'll be willing to share. And it has, to this point, worked for me, where I'll get 1 or 2 people sharing their sample with me.
I went through a very similar experience. Also in my department, I didn't really have anybody who's applied to these major external funding before, so I didn't really have anyone to consult with. I had very supportive faculty members, though. My advisor, who's extremely supportive, she's read everything that I've written and given very sharp and critical and constructive feedback. Something else that I did was, for the Fulbright specifically, there are a lot of like graduate student communities online. Like, am I allowed to mention like gradcafe.com, for example, also on Reddit? And also there are like Slack groups for like Fulbright applicants. And so I actually connected with somebody who got the Fulbright-Hays to Turkey. This person is not from FSU, but she was very kind enough to share her application with me. And so I got to read her application, what she wrote in her research proposal and everything. We're not even in the same field, but that was very eye-opening. So I think I very much agree that you should probably try to like reach out to past recipients. And you know, some of them will just be happy to kind of be useful to you. Yeah.
I lurk on the subreddits for various awards just to see how students are talking about the application process, and it is helpful. So yeah, absolutely, you are allowed to mention that. I'll say that, you know, from my perspective as an advisor, I would always encourage people who are applying for an award to do their own first draft first. I mean, it's important to know what the order of information they're looking for, and examples can help you do that, but also just following the instructions in the application is going to tell you exactly the order in which they are looking for the information to be relayed in the application. So you don't really need to see an example to do that. And the danger sometimes of seeing too many examples before you begin to write is that you're trying to replicate those examples rather than write your own experience. And you know, one of the things that we always think is important to come through in a funding application is for it to really be authentic and to be in your voice, and not trying to be, you know, not trying to sound like a composite of 5 previous finalists who also won the award you're applying for. The thing that made them finalists was not that they had read a bunch of examples, it's that they had good things to say and they believed in their work and they said it well. So after you've written a draft or two, sure, looking at some examples can help you see if you're on track, can help you see sort of how other people the amount of space they might have given to different parts that were included in the application. But I would absolutely encourage you to begin with your own words and then see what other people did. I think we can stick with a similar theme, building on the conversation we just had a little bit, because this is adjacent to having looked at examples, and Emily and Alba, you both mentioned this a little bit as well. But I'm curious who you all have found to be useful for you in the process of writing grant and fellowship applications. Have you thought about it a little bit as like having a support team? Did you have peers, colleagues? I mean, I know for three of you, I read drafts for you, but you also, I'm sure, had faculty at times reading things. I've always thought it's useful sometimes to have, a variety of different readers, people who are experts in your field, people who are not experts in your field, people who maybe are like family members who aren't academics at all, and can provide a very different sort of perspective. So I've always been a proponent of saying you should have a wide readership for review, but I'm curious what each of you has found to be useful in that regard.
So I switched to social work after like 10 years in another field and had literally nobody with any social work experience in my orbit. And so the first, I don't know, year of applications, I'm part of the online program, so I'm not even in Tallahassee. So I didn't know my professors well enough, knew them well enough to ask for letters of rec, but not well enough to ask them to read my applications. And so I had my friends, one of whom is a professional editor, another one who is a communications director, just like reading them for me and giving me notes. And then I think at some point when you started reading them, I stopped having them look at them unless it was what I was really nervous about, because I just couldn't handle 4 rounds of edits anymore. I was so burnt out. But I will say to everyone here who is like working on applications, genuinely having Dr. McCall read them for me made it like at least 25% easier for the last year and a half I was doing these applications, because he does so, I don't know, you must do such an obscene volume of these that he clocks things that never in 1 million years would I have noticed before I went to submit, and it made a big difference.
Oh, Emily, you can go on. Okay. For me, I try to find a balance, because sometimes I've also discovered when I'm still pretty much putting the application together, I'm still brainstorming, still trying to figure out what the structure would look like, even clarify my idea. I try not to share my work with too many people at that point, because it might become more of a problem than actually being more of help. Um, so I at least try to get my idea solidified to some extent before sharing that, right? So to the point where I feel, oh, okay, um, I can share this with more people. In the last 2 years, I've only worked at that stage with Dr. McCall. And we'll trade that document back and forth, and I'll get, his comment. Um, and after that stage, then I might move on to sharing my work with my professor, with some of my committee members, and just to get discipline discipline specific feedbacks, right? And when I move on from that stage, I might share with a friend or two outside of my discipline, but at least at the initial stage, I keep it to myself and Dr. McCall, and then my professor, my committee members, and then friends coming later on more. I mean, and the purpose of doing that is so that I can get um interdisciplinary perspectives. That's why keep friends for later on. But to that extent, I have gotten solid advice from Dr. McCall, and then my professor and my committee members would have ensured that um you know um the ideas to a great extent empirical in my discipline, right? So I get it's more like kind of doing peer review, sort of. um yeah, that's what I've done.
Yeah, I had a very similar approach. I wrote my own draft, and I think I turned it into Dr. McCall first because I always knew that like Dr. McCall being the professional expert in grant writing, he would offer the most like constructive uh feedback for like the general outline and the structure of your grant of your writing. And so that's what I did first. And after I kind of like honed in more on the draft, I turned it into my advisor, and I showed it to my partner who's in a different field adjacent, but not in history. And he kind of helped out with generally like just editorial things for the draft. And I don't think I actually showed it to any of my friends or colleagues. Um, I thought that I have to be highly selective of who I show it to, otherwise you'd just be getting too many feedback, and I already kind of knew I was expecting the things for like my peers to say. So I wanted to hear more from like my, professors and faculty and advisors and Dr. McCall. Um, yeah, so that's kind of like my approach to it.
I think asking your device to take a look at your work, it's always good. But something a little different that I want to bring it up here is that now some agencies allow you to use AI to work on your application. So for example, last time that I applied for American Heart Association, there was a little bar asking like, did you use any type of artificial intelligence to work in any section of this proposal? And then if you put yes, they're gonna ask you where, in which document. So they listed all the documents that you submitted, and they ask which one you use AI. And apparently, they don't want to know if you wrote the whole thing using AI or if you just added one sentence. They just want to know, did you use AI, yes or no? They don't want to know in which extent. It's a yes or no question. And apparently, there's another sentence there saying pretty much that it won't interfere with the evaluation of your work if you say yes. So it looks like they are okay with you editing or even writing part of your proposal using AI. I don't know which extent that's a good or a bad thing. I cannot tell how they're gonna um use that against you or not. But now they are curious to know if people are using AI or not. And I use AI to edit a few things and not to write, but just I wrote it and then I need to like make this 100 words 90 and I was having trouble, so I asked AI to kind of like shorten it for me. Um, but I have to say yes, I use AI. I have to be honest, right? Because you have to be honest when your application. But they say it's not going to be used against you. But it goes from, you know, from fellowship to fellowship. But I thought it was very interesting.
That is really interesting. I had not, I didn't know they were asking that in any applications at this point, but obviously the fellowship advisor world has been talking a lot about sort of the impact that AI is going to have on the preparation of fellowship applications. I've definitely spent some time playing around in ChatGPT and asking it to do things like generate a Fulbright personal statement for me, a Fulbright statement of grant purpose, and honestly, it does a decent first draft of things. What it has for me completely failed with is when I've said I need a 300-word personal statement, and then it'll spit back one that's like 650 words. It does not seem to understand when I tell it I need it to do specific word counts, but
Yeah, because I think the problem with the AI, depending on for what you're using, you feel like you're cheating the system, right? You're cheating. It's being unfair, you know, to the other competitors or the other applicants.
mhm.
But just keep in mind that things are changing and the agencies are starting to allow people to use AI for editing your submission at some point. So yeah, just keep in mind that it's a possibility. And if they ask you, please be fair and say yes or no to the question. I think it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I also would imagine that part of what they're doing with that question is simply starting to build getting statistics on how often people are using AI at this point and asking people to self-report.
I don't think the reviewer will have access to that information. Although now that I became reviewer in for some things, I can see parts where it was AI generation, because AI uses very specific words and very specific formatting, and you start to, the more you use, the more you get to know the AI. So yeah, there are a lot of repetitions, things that the AI will always say this word next to this sentence is always there at the end of the paragraph, and you start seeing different people with different applications writing the same sentence at the end of paragraphs.
Interesting.
So you start to catch, as a reviewer, what is AI and what is not.
Well, I mean, that is certainly part of the world we're entering into now, though, is that AI can act as a reader or a content generator for you. So just a note, since Alaba, Emily, and Margot, you all mentioned having worked a lot with me on fellowship applications. Absolutely, that is something my office will do. If you are an FSU graduate student, we are happy to work with you at any stage of applying for an external funding opportunity that you've identified. My background is in history, so Alaba and Emily, I felt pretty comfortable with the areas that you all do work in, and could even sometimes have some sense of your methodologies and such. That's not always the case, and most of the time it's not at all the case. Margot, I have no idea what social workers do really, other than having sat across from one a number of times. So I absolutely would say you should be working with faculty in your department, your PI, your dissertation chair, anybody else who's a specialist in your area of content. They're going to be the best people to make sure that your theory, your methodology, your statistical analysis, your experimental design, all those things are really sound. That's not the role that me or Dr. Stevenson are going to really take on when we're reviewing your application. What we're going to do is make sure that it's doing what the application is asking it to do, and it's doing it in language that is clear. And sometimes we can help you. I know, Margot, you've worked on some things that it was a little difficult to figure out what they were trying to ask by the way they were asking it. And so that's also something I can help you sort of troubleshoot at times, is what are they really trying to get at with this particular prompt that they're giving you? What sort of answer are they expecting here?
I want to add to this, because I think you're selling yourself a little short. That and I think all of us have said it, one of the most challenging things about these applications is knowing what they're looking for, right? It is a crapshoot, but there are things that they signal in these applications that are not always clear. I mean, now after doing them for 3 years, I still can't always clock it. And what you are always good at doing is pointing out, like, look at these things that they've asked for either in the essay or the top of the application or on their About Us page, like how to tailor each of these applications to the organization that you're applying to. And even if it is clockable, it's not always easy to work into the essay. And I think that's where you were just an invaluable resource, because I know how to talk about my field and I know how to put things in layman's terms for people who don't know anything about social work. But I learned almost nothing in the 3 years of doing scholarship applications of how to tailor them. And I'm sure some of these bigger ones and like more prestigious ones that I got toward the end here, I would not have gotten if I hadn't had your eyes on it.
We'll never know, Mario. You might have done just fine without me. I have a question I could end at, but I would like to again offer a chance for anybody who's still here following along to ask any questions you want of our panelists.
I don't know if that has been discussed or not, because I came in a little bit late. Too late. Is there any databases that we can access and look into, like for opportunities?
Yeah, so I'll answer that one. Absolutely, there are databases. I think I shared it before you got here, Ahmed, but there is I'm going to reshare it. Here is a link to
Thank you.
a video we've done on the Pivot database that you can use as an FSU student. And then I'm going to also link to our just general website page that takes you to different databases. Most of them are just open, hosted by other universities, and you can just do a funding search inside any of those.
Yeah, thank you. I got the links. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anybody else want to ask any questions before we move toward a conclusion? Okay, well then I'd like to end on a hopefully an uplifting and inspiring note, and ask each of you to, if you can, tell us sort of what did winning any one of the things that you've gotten, what did it do for your graduate career that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise? I know, Margot, you started by saying simply that you just needed the money, but I know that some of the things you've gotten here in this last year have allowed you to do more than you thought you would wind up doing through this program. So let's end on a sort of, what value did you get simply beyond being able to just afford your program and have the funding you needed to continue on doing the things that you would have done in your program? But what did this sort of unlock for you, or in what ways did this add value beyond the monetary value?
The biggest one, so one at the very beginning and one at the very end. So at the beginning, I got the National Association of Social Workers, which is like they do a lot of the credits, and they're the biggest like social work professional org. They funded me right at the beginning, which I came in with no social work experience. So I thought this was an absolute crapshoot. Like, I thought there was no chance I was going to get this, but I came in with a really specific, not project, but focus in my field for my clinical work. Why I went back to grad school at all. And that really gave me a confidence boost that, like, oh, people see the thing that I am, my mission, and are taking it seriously, and I am on the right track here. And then, so that was really nice. And then the last one was Council on Social Work Education, who accredits all the social work schools in the US. And in addition to the very tidy stipend I'm getting this year, they're taking us to 2 conferences, and they're giving us professional development stipends, and like allowing me to do a lot of things I would not have gotten to do otherwise. Like the networking alone from the conferences, they're huge conferences, so it's a really big deal. So even those 2 alone were super worthwhile for the non-monetary reasons.
I think it was a huge self-esteem and confidence boost. And so like after you get like the one grant that you really were hoping to get, things that you might apply afterward, you have a better sense of self as a scholar, and as a person. So I think I sounded more sure in my writing afterward. And I think it also opens up to other like opportunities to network with people, and just kind of like, I don't know, this sense of like recognition like that you get. It's pretty outstanding. But this was very much necessary for my dissertation work, because I have to go to Japan to get my primary source material, and so in many ways this was kind of required, for me to actually complete my degree. But yeah.
Yeah, my response is very similar to Emily's. Um, in graduate school, we all mostly talk about imposter syndrome and this, and by the way, if you feel that, it means you are not an imposter, because those who are imposters don't feel that. Um, so, um, yeah, So to get some sort of affirmation that what you're doing is important, even though regardless what you're doing is important, but to get that affirmation from a fellowship that what you're doing is important, um, is perhaps one of the best feeling in the world. Um, and in my own case, I applied for the ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellowship, which I was selected as part of the inaugural cohort, and that is a big deal. And more than 700 people applied, and only 45 was chosen. And just reading that and seeing that you're one of the 45, and then I read the comments of my reviewers. It's mind blowing, and then some of them gave suggestions. First they all sang how great the application was and this and that. Oh, we think this approach, they're basically talking about how important my project is. And just reading that, I don't know what other affirmation is, can trump that. So that affirmation, yeah, for me, that's been great. In terms of what I've been able to do that I wouldn't have been able to do, I mean, this is a $50,000 fellowship, and I was conducting I've been conducting a multi-site research that I wouldn't have been able to fund, not even my department, but I've been able to do research in France, in London, in Ghana, in Nigeria. I've been to South Africa as well, and I'll leaving sometime soon to Tanzania. So I pretty much have the financial resources to engage on these trips and do my research, and it's transforming, my overall research. And so it's fantabulous. So if you get a major fellowship, it's one of the best affirmation you might ever get in your career. Yeah. Thanks.
And for me, just quickly saying is that when you get a fellowship, it helps to getting a second one. So at least in my field, showing that you have acquired funding previously helps you, especially if you have that work published. So the reviewers in the next cycle can see like, wow, he got a grant, he published his work that he submitted. So it means that he can actually do the proposed work and publish it. So that gives you, I don't know, a stronger CV when you're applying for a second grant. It's weird, but at least in science, seems like the more grants you have, the higher the chance of you getting another one.
Yeah, that's true in every field. Funding attracts funding. That's just the way it works. So it's always worthwhile to apply to small awards, right? Because you win a small award, that might help you win the next bigger award as well. So absolutely. And one thing you basically all suggested that in a lot of ways it was very validating and affirming to have won the funding, and that's absolutely true. It is validation of the work that you do, and it's worth. But again, as we said before, not winning it doesn't invalidate your work. So both of those things are true. Well, panelists, Alba, Emily, Margot, Icon, thank you all so much for joining us today. For those of you in the audience, we will make this recording available hopefully in the next week or so. I did launch a short poll, so please answer it if you can. And yeah, I appreciate everybody joining us. If you are on campus Thursday night, my office is also hosting a networking event. So we will be in the HSF building's Great Hall on the 4th floor from 5 to 7 p.m. Please feel free to join us. People other students who have won awards, including Vicon, will be there to talk a little bit more one-on-one if you are interested in doing so. But it's also just a chance to get to meet some people outside of your discipline, make some connections on campus. We'll have food. So please plan to join us if you are around and able to.